Hey everyone, welcome back to Dev Parkour. In this video, I'm going to take a PHP app that I've been working on for a while. It's the Glass Minnow app. If you haven't been following the channel, I've been taking a PHP app that I wrote several years ago and kind of bringing it into the modern era and hopefully building it so it's a little bit more on the future-proof side. And in today's video, I want to kind of totally revamp the UI from a technical perspective. It's not going to look any different, but basically what I want to do is introduce React. So the UI uses a lot, and I mean a lot, of jQuery. That's not necessarily bad. It's just there's a lot of stuff that I'm doing in jQuery that is a lot easier to do in React and probably going to be a lot less bug prone. And I think is going to make the app much better. Now, I'm not going to take the entire UI and migrate it from PHP and jQuery into React, all in this video. But I am going to start with a specific screen that I think will show us a lot of different kind of gotchas when you're doing this. So it's not as straightforward as copying and pasting and changing a bit of formatting around, but I also don't want to go the route of just doing a complete rewrite. I do want to be conscious of what the app did before, and also it's been a long time since I wrote this app. I don't remember everything that it does, and I don't want to lose things in the process of doing a rewrite. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the existing code and use that as kind of the basis for our new React component driven UI. So let me switch over to Visual Studio Code and I'll show you the file that I'm talking about. So it's in the views folder and it's event /new.php. And you can see it starts off with some fairly standard PHP. It looks like it's kind of setting some stuff up. And then as we get into it, there's an opening script tag, there's a closing script tag, there's another opening script tag. So we started script on line 22 and we're still going. And then that goes all the way until line 404. So nearly 400 lines of JavaScript, really just to handle how this form operates. So we've got some click handlers, we've got some change handlers. That's an on change. We have some functions out in the middle of nowhere. I'm not entirely sure what they do. It looks like some date calculations. That's always scary. But some of these functions we might be able to keep as is. We'll see where they actually get used. We also have some PHP being injected into the JavaScript. That's a little scary. We have a list of holidays. That's curious, and it looks like it ends in January of 2018. So that's a little bit scary. What else do we have? We have some key down, some change, some blur events, some various sections of the page. Doing a lot of stuff here. I do remember one of the things that's on this page is line items and summarizing of line items. React will make this super simple. Super simple. All right. Handling tabs, handling enter from it looks like on key down events. We've got a lot of stuff going on, but this is fairly typical if you're building a form and driving the interaction from jQuery. You're going to have click events, blur events, key down events all over the place. And it looks like here I even introduced some templates. So that'll be really easy to turn into React. So I'm excited about that part. Let's see, what else do we have? we have some get JSON calls that are using jQuery, which we can replace with fetch. So that'll work out well. What else do we have? Ooh, autocomplete. This one is going to be a little bit tricky because autocomplete is a very well done jQuery plugin, but there is React analog, but it's not a one-to-one thing. So we'll actually see how we get into that, and I may actually just kind of stop talking for a while once I get into this and just kind of go through it. Maybe provide a voiceover, in post-production, but I might just start doing stuff and then see where it goes. Let me see if there are any other gems in here. Some more autocomplete. Here we're triggering an event, so that'll be interesting. We'll need to make sure we account for that. Here we're accounting for 2 different events, so another thing to watch out for. We're submitting the form here. Interesting. And it looks like we have some validation. So again, some stuff that will be potentially easier to do in React. So I think let's get right to it. Let's start with, you can say I already kind of cheated a little bit. Let's create React app, and I am going to use npm, and I am going to use TypeScript. I'm going to call it UI, and it's going to be in the base of the directory. Now, while that's running, I want to talk about something that I was thinking about before I started recording this video, and that was how I wanted to run the PHP part of the app and the React part of the app at the same time. So I didn't want to do something like React scripts eject and then just manage it all myself. I did want to run the Webpack development server and then have the PHP development server run the PHP side of things. If I were just building a pure API in PHP, the way to do it would be to proxy non-HTML requests through Webpack, and there is a way to do that. But most of my app is still PHP, so I've been debating back and forth whether I wanted to have PHP proxy the React stuff or have the React stuff proxy the PHP stuff, how I wanted to do that. Ultimately, I decided that long term, I do want the app to be a 100% React front end. So there's really no downside to just having React proxy the PHP stuff. It does mean that right off the bat, there's going to be a lot of stuff that I can't get to through the URL that I'm going to use to get to the React site. I will have to go to a different URL in order to get to the PHP stuff. But at least for now, I don't think that's the end of the world. I am probably, I'm not going to commit this on screen or on camera, but I probably will create a branch for this because this is kind of experimental. And I'm not going to ship that branch until things like authentication and the header and footer are dealt with. And that might involve the entire React rewrite all on that branch. So we'll see how that goes. But for now, we're gonna start with that. So let's collapse everything. You'll see it created a new UI folder here. And what we're going to do is in the package JSON, we're going to add a new key. And I am going to look up my cheat sheet on my phone. Yeah, okay, so it's proxy and HTTP localhost, and then the port that it's going to run on. I'm actually going to run the PHP development server, so I am going to run that on port 8000. So in order to do that, let's push d public and php-s localhost 8000, and this is actually going to be, I always forget the path, so I think it's vendor pales router. Yeah, and of course we will be push d'ing down a directory, so we need to have ... at the beginning of that. And then let's put a pop d at the end. Now that runs the PHP. And if we actually go to a new window here, we can localhost 8000, and yeah, okay, so we have connection string issues. That's fine. At least the PHP is running. I'll deal with the connection string issues after I stop talking for a minute. Let's start the create React app stuff running. So let's actually split screen, and let's go into UI, and then npm start run. All right, now it's running on port 3000, and this will be just the default React app. So nothing fancy there, but it does mean that if I went to, I'd actually have to run a request from here. Actually, I should be able to do that from the console. If I do something like fetch /API/info. This route does not exist, but do that, and we get a 500 internal server error. And let's see what we got. No response, but we did get an internal server error. And if we go to here, we should see that request actually came in. And pretty sure we do, because I see multiple errors here. Just to be on this, just to be sure, let's go back to the console and run that again. And there we go. We have, there's our blank lines, and you can see we got a 500 error. So that means that we are successfully proxying API requests back to PHP. So that's how I'm going to do this. That's the basic setup. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy as I go through and copy a bunch of PHP and turn it into React. Okay, so I want to interject real quick to say that I have been working on this for approximately 6 hours over the last few days. I'm still not done yet. So what follows in this video is actually me going through doing this, sped up quite a bit with a little bit of commentary as I go through. If you're interested, I will upload the raw footage, probably still sped up, but not quite as much. And I might go into more detail about some of the specific things that I'm doing. So if that's something you're interested in, go ahead and leave a comment down below. The reason that I didn't finish this process before posting this video, aside from the fact that I had a deadline coming up, was really more that I just ran out of space on my computer to record video. I didn't realize it was going to take quite so long, but I did want to record the entire process of me doing this. So I hope you'll bear with me. I hope you're as interested in what comes next as I was in going through it. To be completely honest, this is the first time that I really went through and pulled a jQuery app and turned it into React. So it was kind of fun for me, new experience for me as well. Hope you enjoy it as much as I did. And here we go. All right, so we're going to start out with just the base create React app and create a new component. Everything we're doing is going to go into one gigantic component. Probably not the best way to do this long term. In fact, definitely not the best way to do this long term. But for step one, that's what we're going to do. Going to test it out, make sure it works. And you'll see I just copied all of the PHP from that view and just pasted it into the React component. Obviously, a lot of it is going to be red. We're going to fix that over the course of the next 45 minutes or so. But to start out with, I'm just going to go through top to bottom and kind of comment some of the things that I discover. So here we're into some jQuery stuff, and I'm just writing some comments to myself. And there are a couple, in my opinion, obvious opportunities to clean up. So changing some functions that are defined in more of a jQuery way to more of the way that I'm comfortable or familiar with writing React, with functions defined const and that sort of thing. But for the most part, I'm just going through and adding comments to kind of understand the code and everything that's going on. And basically, I don't want to do anything too drastic here. You can see here I'm actually turning it just straight into JSX. I figured that was a fairly safe operation, fairly safe change. But for the most part, I'm not doing anything drastic. Just because I want to get context on everything that's going on in this page right up front. So on my second pass and third pass and fourth pass, and we'll see how many passes I actually get to in this video, I can make some of those changes based on some of the context that I'm getting here. So there I wrote a note for myself. I really should use flexor grid for that table instead of with 100. That didn't make any sense. But you can see here, the jQuery style is a lot of event handlers and key up handlers and that sort of thing. And that's something that I actually don't finish in this video. That's not something that's as easy, as straightforward as the traditional React, the typical React stuff. So I don't actually do it in this video. That's something that I'll need to get back to a little bit later. But now you can see we're getting into more PHP land, and I actually just return all of this markup as the basically the render function. But now we need some sort of model, and I'm just going to use the useState hook from React, nothing fancy. Give myself a way to access the model, set the model, and update the model. I'm not going to worry about types too much right this second. You'll see later in the video I actually do that. I actually fill in the what the order needs. But here we're converting some PHP echo statements, and most of them into React, basically string interpolations. It turns out that in building this page, I had a bunch of helper methods to create form fields. So I had this function textbox4, I had another one called like number4 and select4. You'll see them pop up here a little bit later. That was something that I wrote specifically for Pales back in the day. So it's all implemented in PHP. And rather than trying to figure out what markup was supposed to show up for that, I figured, you know what, I'm already using something that generates essentially reusable pieces. Let's just use these functions and then implement the functions to spit out the markup that the PHP versions do as well. So here I'm just giving them a quick and dirty implementation. just so that I can, get on to the next thing. A little bit later in the video, you'll see that I actually do add the proper markup. I copy the correct markup from the PHP implementation and put that in here. TypeScript is always kind of an interesting beast when you're taking something that is just using straight JavaScript, raw JavaScript, or in this case it was just PHP, and then trying to type it. In this case, this is something, the dictionary type is something that I've kind of taken for granted. We use it at work, works really well, and it is fantastic. But obviously that doesn't exist all the places, so I needed to add it in here. So here I'm adding an implementation for number 4, very similar for text box 4, just an input instead of, or an input type equals number as opposed to input type equals text. And here you go. Here you can see I'm looking through the PHP to try to figure out what markup is actually getting generated. So for number, I'm verifying that it's just input type equals number. And it turned out that I actually, for this particular project, I'd extended that Pales package. So I had some stuff in Pales, and I had some stuff that I'd added on top of Pales. And my mantra is always, if I do something once, just do it. If I do something twice, copy and paste. If I do something a third time, or it feels like I might do something a third time, definitely start refactoring. So here you can see I started adding something called date for, and it became very apparent that I was going to be creating a lot of these some input type _for functions that really did essentially the same thing. So I might as well just create one function called input for, and then have the text box for, date for, number for, call that input for function. So, and now I'm going through and changing some syntax around. Obviously, PHP has a little bit different syntax for what it calls associative arrays, and what in JavaScript is basically an object, or TypeScript you might call it a dictionary. How it determines whether something is checked is a little bit different. And so here I'm just going through and basically changing syntax around, changing arrows to dots, changing this arrow model to, I think it's order dot something. This current user, that doesn't exist because that's a server-side construct, so I had to do something a little bit different there. We also have some things that definitely I have access to on the server side that on the client side I'm going to have to figure out a little bit later. I don't do it in this video, but I'm going to have to figure out where I can get those things. Kind of like make sure the app knows who it thinks it is. So things like a list of salespeople, a list of order statuses, things like that. Things that are potentially configurable, but I don't have here. I don't have the luxury of being able to go straight to the database from the client side. So you might see me checking disk space a few times here. I actually ran out of disk space recording this just because it took so long and I was recording the entire thing. So I think I mentioned already, this is significantly sped up, and this is 8 times normal speed. So yeah, I'm just going through and changing some of my PHP calls to my helper methods around to JavaScript helper functions to generate input fields. And I think I actually found a couple bugs here. For some reason I had things that should definitely have been checkboxes. I guess in hindsight, later on, I determined that they actually really should have been hidden fields, but for one reason or another, they were, I don't know, the syntax was really weird. I think they are supposed to be hidden fields. They're not supposed to be checkboxes. But realistically, when I deal with them in React land, I'm going to just submit the form and do some other operation if a particular button is clicked. I don't need to set a form field and then have that get submitted. Now, one thing to note while I'm just kind of going through and doing more of the same here is that I do have prettier enabled. If you look in the bottom right-hand corner of my screen, you'll see a little exclamation mark and a triangle next to prettier. As you might imagine, with this many errors, prettier has absolutely no idea what to do with the page. And quite frankly, I'm glad. You'll see once I get pretty close to the end, it's either this pass or maybe the next pass. Prettier kicks in and reformats the markup, and it, in my opinion, gets really hard to read with with being zoomed in this far. So now at this point, you'll notice that I have to change some PHP around, because in PHP, the typical way to handle multiple items is just a for each, whereas in React, the idiomatic way is to take an array and then map over that array and return JSX. So I had to do things a little bit differently, and I think I changed. I decided to change how things worked a little bit. I decided to make there always be a blank line item at the end of the list of line items, and similarly for payments. Before, in the PHP version, what would actually happen is that if you hit enter at the very end of the line items, or hit tab, I think, it would give you a new row. So you wouldn't see a blank row unless you were adding a new line item. That's not typical of things like this. It's typical to see a blank row, an empty row at the bottom. So I decided to go that route. Made the markup a little bit easier. So I had a map over line items, and then had the blank row show up as well. So now you can see I'm mapping over payments. So doing basically the same thing I just did with line items, but with payments instead. And it turned out that there was a little bit of extra logic here. I'm really not sure what that was for. It looks like at one point in time, I wanted to show different payment types in slightly different ways. And that requirement went away. I decided to show all of them as inputs. I left the markup in place here just in case I wanted to go back to, at some point in time, showing some payments as just straight read-only text, and some as a set of input fields. Maybe I'll go back to that. Maybe I won't. Not really sure. Kind of have to see how things turn out. You can see I still have quite a bit of red here. So as I go through, I am fixing it. The red is getting a little less continuous. You can see I got to the bottom of the page, and now I'm back up at the top. And now I have to deal with this $sign. And you can see I had this comment. I just declare the $sign just to make it go away. And see, obviously I'm going to have to deal with all of the stuff that goes on with jQuery. That's the whole point of this video. I really want to deal with this JavaScript, but I don't want to have to fight with dollar not being defined. I know dollar is not defined. That's the whole point. I don't want to. I want to deal with the things that aren't jQuery oriented. What are things that I actually need to change? So you can see here I'm adding types to things just so that those errors go away. Mainly typing events, making them of type event, and a lot of things that I don't really care about, making them of giving them a type of any. Now I do have no implicit any on, which is why all of those were errors before I added the type of any. But that doesn't prevent me from using any explicitly as a type. I'm not using those anymore. And eventually I delete them, but not on this pass. You can see here I'm trying to do things in terms of either vanilla JavaScript, basic DOM objects. Or as much as possible, do some things in JSX and React. This ended up being tricky, and I knew that I wasn't actually going to be using this code at all. I was actually just going to add something to the line items and payments array later on, so I just gave up on those functions. These look like they were going to be a little bit extra involved, but I was able to convert them into something that kind of sort of made sense. Again, I'm not really looking for idiomatic React here. I'm going for make the compiler happy. That's the pass here. So pass number 1 was kind of comment things out, or add comments, kind of figure out where I was, kind of gain some context. And pass 2 is make the compiler happy. And you can see where the cursor is. Above the cursor, there is no red. There are no errors. Below the cursor is where all the errors are. Now at this point, you'll notice that I just added moment. It turns out that I'm doing some date math here, and I'm actually using moment on the in the PHP version of the app. So here I decided, you know what, just go ahead and add moment. Moment's pretty good. Yes, there are ways, and in fact, on the Moment website, you'll see they specifically say you probably shouldn't be using Moment anymore. There are built-in ways to do everything that Moment does, or pretty much everything that Moment does. I'm already using Moment here. I might as well just keep using Moment. So yeah, now at this point, you can see I'm starting to add some types to some properties to the order type. I need to actually get some of those types squared away, and so then I start adding some of these properties and giving them proper types. And in order for the state typing to work, I have to give it a kind of a default order. Give it some basic values. And then I give myself a helper function here, and I could not for the life of me remember the syntax for a generic const style function. So I just gave up and made it a function style function. If you remember how to do that, go ahead and leave that in the comments. I'm sure I can look it up, and as soon as I see it, I'll be like, oh yeah, that's how I do it. Of course, that's obvious. Why wasn't that obvious to me before? But yeah, so here I did decide to make these start dates strings ultimately, even though they say string or date here, and now string or moment. I did a little bit of deliberation as I was writing this code, and ultimately fell back to strings because realistically that's how they're going to come back from the server. The server isn't going to give me back a moment object. It's not going to give me back a date object. It's going to give me back a string. So I thought, why not? Let's just be consistent and say everyone has to treat it as a string. Everyone just assume that it's a string. That way everybody's on the same page, and we don't have to worry about if it is a moment object, using it as a moment object. If it's a date object, using it as if it's a date object. And if it's a string, converting it to either a moment or a date object. That would just be a bit frustrating. Here, just adding some more types, adding a default value. And you can see the more I go, the more red goes away. So I keep going through, and again, above the cursor, no red. Below the cursor, I have red. Now at this point, I do have some constants, and I go through a couple iterations of these, but I did mention them in the intro. Those were things that lived in PHP, and they were fine when they were in PHP land. But once I pull them into React, I kind of need them in React side. But at the same time, as I was doing this, I realized that I don't think these should really be constants client side. I think these should be kind of application state. These are part of the application's configuration, kind of the same way that things like order status IDs and salespeople are like application state. They're probably not going to change all that often, but they really are something that should be stored in the database. So some of these things should be pulled from the database. So I'm probably going to have to change how I'm doing that a little bit later. But since this is the only view, the only React view that I'm creating right now, I figured just stick with what's already there and go with that. Yeah, so as I'm going, I'm adding more properties to this order type, and adding, where necessary, adding default values to the default order, and just making the types work. That's a momentism, that +1 week. Since I'm importing moment as an npm package or as a module, it doesn't override all of that date functionality, or it doesn't trounce the JavaScript date object. I don't think. I hope it doesn't, at least. So that does mean I need to do specific moment style things. Here's some more, things that I'm debating how I want to create the interface to some of these functions, because JavaScript and PHP are very different languages. They afford different functionality, and in TypeScript, I have the choice of, I think in that case it was a choice between a dictionary of key to string or an array, and I decided that I wanted to allow people, myself, to be able to pass in an array of things and also functions to generate the key and the value, or a dictionary of keys and values. So now I get into the interesting part with line items and payments, and mapping over line items, which have a quantity, description, price, and line total. And there we go. Now I'm fixing up those inputs and squaring them away. Got a few other properties that I needed to handle that got kind of lost in the shuffle. A lot of these lines here, again, because Prettier isn't active, it hasn't figured out how everything's supposed to work yet. A lot of these lines are fairly long and didn't fit on the screen, so there were actually errors at the ends of lines that I wasn't seeing, that I had to go back and fix. Now another thing that was interesting, I'm not sure if I fix it here. Oh, there we go. Prettier just kicked in, and now I have a much longer page to edit. But what I was going to say was, one of the interesting things is this payment total idea. Now that's something that I do want to save with the order, and order management systems like this, interim calculations, you don't just want to assume that line item plus line item plus line item plus line item equals payment total. You really do want to save all of the numbers throughout all the calculations, all in the database, all with the order object, basically for audit tracking purposes. Because it's a database, someone could go in and change the value of a line item, but you do want to track the number that was actually charged to a customer and why a particular number was charged to a customer. So I went back and forth. It might be on a later pass here, going back and forth on how I'm going to calculate this. Because realistically, this should be computed both client side and server side and passed back and forth. And there's a little bit of complexity there that ended up being interesting. I was going to say fun, but we'll just say interesting. So here we're into payments, and payments type. I decided not to make it a string, but actually use the values that could be selected for payment type. Probably the most irritating thing through all of this is that I had so many inline styles here, which, say what you will about that. I don't think I should have had nearly this many inline styles here. But obviously the syntax for HTML is style equals quotes and then a string. In React, the style property takes an object. So it has to be style equals curly braces and then another set of curly braces because it's an object, and then JavaScript object notation essentially, for all of the styles that you have to apply. So changing those over, that probably took the bulk of the time, honestly. That was pretty frustrating. Now I think this is pass number 3. So I actually just took out the $sign, the declare $sign, because obviously that doesn't run in the browser. Just because I declared it on the TypeScript side doesn't mean it actually exists. It means the TypeScript compiler doesn't complain about it. So now I have to go through and turn all of the all of the jQuery style event handling into React style event handling, which, as you saw, I had to look some things up. I forgot how they worked, but some of these things ended up being super simple. That 4 or 5 lines of jQuery ended up being 1 line of React. One use state hook, and then just setting the state. So here we make it work with all the tabs, and then Prettier does its thing. Add some on clicks to actually call the function. And I don't remember if I tested here, if I just trust that it's going to work and move on to the next thing. But most of the things here was basically, okay, so I see an event handler, let's give it a name, and then if it depends on some sort of state, let's create a use state hook and call the right right state set functions, and then make sure they're wired up from the right places, and then reference the state from the proper place in the DOM, in the render portion of the method. Here, obviously, I just went old school and went with this particular function would have been a little bit challenging to make React happy. This probably will break when I actually get to the end and get this all squared away and wired up. But that I didn't want to do. That would have been at least an hour on camera, and it would have been super boring for all of you. So I didn't want to do that. This was, like I said in the comment, that was just ugly. That was pretty painful. It's basically there are certain types of, or certain fields that should only show up when certain order types are chosen, and it really ended up being like 2 or 3 fields. So I just tossed some JavaScript logic. If this condition, then show this field, and that was it. Be done with it. Similarly here, there was a lot of logic there for if you've selected this type of this type of event, this duration of event, whatever, then certain fields show up and others don't. Well, let's just put that logic in the render function, right? This is rendering DOM, rendering React elements based on state. That's something that React really does really well. Right. And here we're back to more of the same. Name the function, replace all of the jQuery stuff with React stuff. Here we're updating the order because that's what needs to happen. And because we actually have React state, we can modify the order object directly. Well, I mean, using the state hooks properly, but we can modify the state as opposed to changing things in the DOM, which always felt kind of dirty to me anyway. So I'd much rather update the state and then let React update the DOM appropriately. And that, I don't know, to me, that function looks a lot cleaner now. And we'll do similarly here. It's a little more complex in this next case, but it's basically just the same thing. Instead of having a bunch of check the DOM and get the value from the DOM, we just look at the order, and if it has a particular condition, then we change what's in the order and let React handle the rest. There is actually, I may have already done it, but there is actually a change that I needed to make to to the update order function, because the way I implemented it initially, it would just change the original order object, and React wouldn't see a change because it was the original order object. But in order to make React actually do something with it, I just basically clone the order object and then call set order on the cloned and then updated order object. But yeah, it made a lot of these functions just a lot easier to read, a lot simpler. There are a couple places, and I think I'll get to one in a few minutes here. There's at least one place where I had to implement a use effect hook. And the reason for that really was because of I was trying to change as little as possible. And I think it might be here with recalculate line total. There's something that needs to happen when the component mounts, and it really shouldn't have been a use effect. It should have been something that happened in the render. Here we go. So I'm cloning the order object, but back to that use effect. It really should have just happened on render. That will happen when I do the next pass off camera. But here I'm debating how I want to handle the line total. I really wanted it to be something that was part of the object. So whenever you changed the quantity or the price, it would update the line total, and it would actually save that as part of the object. That would be part of state, because that really should be part of state. I should be able to get the entire object and have it be something that I can construct the invoice, the bill, the updated order history from, without having to do any calculations on it, because that really that's bad. You want to be able to prove that this is the payment, this is the number that you're dealing with. Not, oh yes, I can figure out this is the number I'm dealing with based on other information in the order history. So here apparently I forgot how to use JavaScript. So I just added a helper method to, again, I'm having trouble with that generic function syntax. So here we're creating a function that just returns the last element of an array. And it actually has to be something that's array-like, so that the type gets kind of funky. But it ends up working out in the end. Right, children is an HTML collection, so I can't create a function that expects an array and have that work. So I just created something that was that had the right type. So this is basically, array-like. It has a length property and it has numeric keys. That's basically what an array looks like. So right, and finally, well, maybe not finally, but at this point, I am trying to use that last function and try to figure out what I actually meant with some of that code. I think that was supposed to be the code that handled hitting enter and or tab from within the line items or payments. And I think what's supposed to happen is if you hit tab in the very last input, in the last line, it gives you a new line, or if you hit enter anywhere in that line, it gives you a new line item line. Very confusing, and it's something that really will only make sense, and I'll only really be able to determine if it worked or not when this whole page works and I try it out and see what happens. But with that, I was able to get rid of a whole bunch of that was the jQuery equivalent of add event lister. on, the dot on, that sort of thing. So I just removed that, and that becomes, on click and that sort of thing in React, setting that property. Now this is the final chunk of the jQuery that I had to replace, and this is date math, which I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. If you're doing math with dates, you have all of my sympathies, because doing math with dates is absolutely horrendous. But I had some of it already in here, so I figured, you know what? Let's just kind of go with the model that already existed. Yeah, here's the use effect that I had to add. Realistically, this should just be based on state, and I should be able to just, I think this is calc shipping days. It just shows one thing on the screen, which it's part of the DOM, so I should just make that part of the render. And make that piece of rendering dependent on state, and not have this use effect here. But yeah, it is what it is, and that's where those form fields were used. That went by kind of quickly, but I decided that, you know what, the video is getting kind of long as is. Let's not do anything with that for now. I did miss a couple. What did I miss? I missed a couple spots where style, the style attribute, was still a string. So I had to fix that. Yeah, and here I ended up looking it up, and the answers still were not something that immediately told me what was going on with my code. And of course, I wrote this function, and then I don't even think I used it, which is kind of a bummer. It's a good function. I really like that function. But here we've got, style, getting past some strings. And I think the reason that I didn't catch it was because in most of these places, it's actually getting passed in as an object, or as a value, to this text box 4 function. So the type system, TypeScript, wouldn't have caught it for me. And now we get it loading. It renders. It's ugly, but it renders. Okay, so I forget what pass we're on. It's, I don't know, the third or fourth pass. I decided, let's take the template and actually spit it in here. So I grabbed layout.php, and basically dumped it into app.tsx. Now, create React app gives you the skeleton of an HTML page. So I couldn't grab, the HTML, the head, and all that stuff. So some of these script and style tags are going to end up in the body, and that's really not great. But for phase 1, for a first pass, that'll work. Change class to class name, because that's what it is in React. And there was some PHP specific stuff that I took out as well. I think I took out all of the navigation. And here we get some, now we have some cool styles. We get bootstrap at least, which is what styles most of the application. There are still some interactions that didn't work. And obviously creating tabs or switching between the tabs didn't actually change what was visible. So here we're going through and adding some logic. Basically, if a particular tab is selected, let's go ahead and make it visible, and you can see that works now. Finally, there were a lot of labels missing, which came from that input4.php file. So I needed to add some more markup to my input4 function, and I think select4 and text area 4 I implemented independently because they didn't really have much overlap until now, as it turns out. So again, I went with my mantra of do something. You have to write something once, do it once. Have to write something twice, do it twice. If you anticipate doing something 3 times, refactor it so that you only do it once. So you can see there we have text boxes. And then I copy that and create an input wrapper for function with basically the same properties and everything, but it takes children. And then we return the input wrapper wrapping children. And then input for can return input wrapper for and what it returned before. And I can do the same thing with select for and text area for, and it just kind of works. It works really well. Works really quickly. Text area didn't have a type, so I had to just manually hard code type, and now it's starting to look essentially the way it does from the PHP app. And I decided to be complete. There was this details thing that I don't think I'm using here, but I figured, why not, just in case. Now I'm playing around with that line total thing, which I don't think I ever got working. Again, I ran out of disk space. All right, thanks for watching. Like I said, I didn't get to do everything that I wanted to do. One of the big things that I didn't get to do was actually build in the reactivity. So you'll see there were a lot of console errors and warnings. Basically, I had HTML elements that I was setting from React, but I wasn't actually responding to UI changes. Obviously, that's bad. I need to fix that before I can ship this in the actual app. But what I do think I determined fairly conclusively is that going this route, though it is tedious, and that's why I sped up the last part of the video significantly, so that you didn't have to sit through me kind of hunting and pecking through everything, that is still much faster and much less error prone. It'll catch a lot more of the features that I built into the system a while back than if I tried to just start from the ground up and build a brand new order experience. There are kind of pros and cons to both methods. I could definitely see if I just wanted to throw away the previous experience and start from the ground up and kind of build a good order experience, then it would make sense to throw away what I had and kind of start with a new order experience from the ground up with a base React app, just a few form fields, and kind of build my way up from there. I'm not a designer, so I'm not going to change the order experience anytime soon. I'm just going to stick with what's there and then kind of maybe use it and maybe evolve it a little more gradually. But the one thing that I knew I needed to do today was change it over to React. So that's what I did. Again, hope you enjoyed this video. I know it's kind of long, but I hope you enjoyed it as much of it as you watched. If you did, hit that thumbs up button. Be sure to subscribe to the channel, click that notification bell. Let me know if you like videos like this where I basically just record me writing code and then either speed it up, or if you want me to not speed it up, maybe I can do one where I just code and kind of talk through as I code, and then don't speed it up as all. You let me know what you want to see from the channel, because I do this for all of you guys. But in any event, appreciate your view. Thanks for watching. I look forward to seeing you in the next one.